What's up guys, this is Z-House from Gun Gamers. I was hoping the next video I was going to be uploading was the 24-hour charity stream highlights reel, but turns out 24 hours of video is a lot to go through, especially when you sat through most of it live once already, and it's been a little difficult to convince myself to finally finish going through all that to make sure I got all the highlights. So instead, I'm actually uploading this video, which is going to be a discussion on the pros and cons of some of the various types of weapon classes and loadouts that you can run at various MilSim and MilSim Lite, larger organized events in general. This will cover things like Third Coast Airsoft, American MilSim, Lion Claws, Overwatch, MilSim West, Desert Fox events, all that stuff, a lot of the types of events that I really like to go to. Obviously, if you're not familiar, at more organized MilSim and MilSim Lite events, there are typically advantages and disadvantages to different classes of guns, and different classes of guns are kind of spec'd for different purposes. Now, as a beginner going into them, you might have preconceived notions about how they play, and as someone who's played a few of them and has played in a squad with all of them on multiple occasions, I figured I would break it down for you guys and give you my opinions on what the various advantages and disadvantages and situational advantages and disadvantages are of some of the different weapon classes that you might run at some MilSim games. Obviously, apply this where it applies. Open plays are a totally different beast. Speedsoft games are a totally different beast. Obviously, I'm not saying classes at MilSim games are the same as your average open play. Like, machine gunners don't have much advantage at games where high caps are allowed. So take everything I say in the appropriate context. But let's get into it. And again, this is my opinion. If you have your own opinions, there's a comment section down there to tell me how stupid I look, how you can't read the band name on my t-shirt, and why my opinions are wrong and yours are right. So be sure to use it. So let's start off by going over what the different classes are that you will generally see. And again, this is weapon classes, not squad classes such as squad leader, medic, and that type of shit. This is weapon classes that you usually see, or most commonly see at least, at these larger event promoters. You've got Rifleman. I've got a handy note guide here, so if I'm looking down at that, and these are my notes, you've got Rifleman, Machine Gunner, Grenadier, you've got Submachine Gunner, Squad Designated Marksman, and you have Sniper. But let's start off our discussion with the most bread and butter, vanilla, absolute base class that everyone's familiar with, and that we all probably, I would assume, have played at least once, and that's Rifleman. Now, Rifleman class it's not sexy. I know that a lot of people think, oh, I don't want to be a basic Rifleman, but the absolute biggest advantage of the Rifleman class is its versatility, and there's a reason why pretty much every Airsoft player, no matter what role they usually play, will have a basic rifle in their rotation along with whatever specialty weapons they typically use. The rifle can do a little bit of everything. It can be built to do most jobs, about 60 to 70% at least, as well as some of the other weapons in these different categories. And it's very simple and easy to get into. It doesn't require a lot of fucking around with different specialty gear and specialty builds. For Rifleman, really, you can play Rifleman very effectively 99% of the time with a stock gun. And then that 1% of the time that you want to specialize, that's super easy too. I mean, most of the time you don't even have to dig into the gearbox. It's just, or you can just HPA it, and then obviously you have all that simplicity of HPA. So it's very, very easy to get into Rifleman. It's very easy to learn, but it's also kind of difficult to master. There's a lot of minutia with Airsoft in general, but Rifleman and playing as a strong Rifleman can be a good way to get into a lot of that minutia. This is kind of the class that you fall back on when you're doing other things, such as if you're being, a squad leader or a platoon leader or a medic. It's very easy to combine this class with other things, or it's easy to combine this class with another class, such as Grenadier, if you mount that grenade onto your standard rifle. But there are, obviously, then you are technically a different class. But it is super easy to just work into any squad. Every event is going to let you play as this. There's no worry about like super hard weapon restrictions or all that kind of stuff. This is the class that is the easiest to play and probably the most useful overall. For some reason, people think because Rifleman isn't specialized, it's not useful. I would argue that makes it the most useful because, like I said, you can 70% do everything pretty much as well as any other class. You can lay suppressing fire, you can clear buildings, you can shoot at long range, especially if you've tuned your rifle well. A well-tuned rifle, a really well-tuned rifle, could be 80% of the way to a lot of these other roles, and really, specialization can come in the form of running a shorter rifle if you're going to a mount site, running a rifle that's more accurized with heavy BBs for longer ranges, or just in general. And you really can do everything. The only disadvantage with Rifleman is that lack of specialization. You're not able to, lay suppressing fire as well as a machine gun. You're not as dominant in close quarters as a submachine gun. You are not as accurate with as much range as a marksman or a sniper. And obviously, you don't have explosive capabilities unless you put a grenade launcher on the bottom of your rifle, and then you're playing the Grenadier class, technically. So that's really the only disadvantage I see. A Rifleman, you're a jack of all trades, master of none. Now the machine gunner. As you might know, this is my personal favorite class to play, so I'm going to have a lot to say on this one. The biggest advantage of the machine gun is that it is a mass casualty producing weapon. You have higher ammo capacity because at MilSim games, again, MilSim games, rifles are usually limited to mid caps and they're not usually allowed to carry as much ammo, whereas machine guns are allowed to use box and drum magazines that carry, 5,000 BBs or whatever your particular machine gun carries. My machine gun of choice, the PKM, happens to carry 5,000 or 7,000 when I get that Bullgear PKM insert. And that's a ridiculous amount of firepower to have on tap without having to do any magazine swaps or even winding because it's wired in. So you have that ridiculous amount of ammo on tap. You have a higher rate of fire. A lot of MilSim games will limit Rifleman to semi-auto, whereas machine guns are allowed to go full auto and have high rate of fire. So you are just spraying ammo in large swaths of area, and you are very effective at suppressing as well as at producing casualties. So you have a lot of utility as a machine gunner. You can be used really well to defend an area and deny a whole avenue of approach to your enemy, or you can be used equally well to keep heads down or produce casualties for your friendlies to advance and run flanks and all that good stuff. So there's really a lot of situations where a machine gun comes in handy. It's also got kind of a low skill floor, I would say. I would say machine gun is one of the specialty classes that's kind of easier to play well, because really, as long as you could be a big dumb idiot and shoot a lot of ammo and, follow directions pretty well and make decent call-outs, you're already okay. There's a high skill ceiling where there's a lot to learn and you can get really into a lot of the minutia of, talking guns with other machine guns, with, intersecting lanes of fire, with, perimeter security and all kinds of, fob security. There's all kinds of other stuff you can learn, but getting into it is pretty easy. Low skill floor, high skill ceiling. It can be very fun to learn and to practice with. And this is a situational advantage depending on the event and even depending on what kind of machine gun you're running. A lot of events will give machine guns a higher velocity, energy limit really. Use joules, not velocity, kids. So let's say, Riflemen are 1.5 joules for their standard limit. A lot of event promoters will allow machine guns to go to like 1.8 joules, or if you're running MMG at MilSim West, you're allowed to go just about 2 joules. So that means that you're approaching DMR level of velocity limit with full auto capability and 5,000 BBs on tap. You can see how that gets pretty stupid pretty quick, and it's a lot of fun. But that is situational. Not every event promoter does that, and in the case of MilSim West, they only allow the higher velocity machine guns if your machine gun is a 308 or greater caliber MMG, like a PKM, like an M60, heavier, bigger machine guns with heavier, bigger rounds. They have a higher ammo capacity and a higher velocity limit, and that's a little bit situational. So it comes with the drawback too. And then that also comes with, in general, the drawback of machine guns. 99% of cases, machine guns are heavier and bulkier than rifles, submachine guns, and even sniper rifles. A PKM is a big, hefty gun, and even that's one of the lighter, like MMG options. That thing can still weigh, 20 pounds fully loaded, especially if you put like a rail and red dot and all that shit on it like I do. So you're talking about a pretty long gun, a pretty heavy gun. Even something like a Shrike, you've still got that big box mag to contend with. Shrikes with those Angel Custom drum mags trigger the fuck out of me. I know a lot of events allow them. They trigger me. Just makes me salty. I know it shouldn't, but it does. But you talk about an M249, you talk about Mark 43, Mark 46, all those other kinds of normal machine gun builds, not the absolute abominations based on machine guns that have never actually been fielded by a military. And you are talking about larger, heavier, bulkier guns. So that's one of the inherent disadvantages of the class, unless you run something like a Shrike with a Mark 18 rail and an Angel Custom drum mag and totally cheese the system. Salt for another day. But that is the biggest disadvantage, is the weight and the bulk. And that can be a lot to manage for longer events, especially, if you're running an MMG at a 40-hour MilSim West game. Another con is the cost. Now, a lot of machine guns, you kind of need to build them up a little bit so that they'll actually feed really well, shoot really well, last a long time. And even like the base cost of a lot of machine guns can be a little bit higher than you're looking at for a standard like rifle setup. And then feeding a machine gun can be expensive too, because you are supposed to be shooting a lot of ammo. And if you're putting good ammo through your machine gun, which I highly recommend, because good ammo just makes it shoot better. And what's better than a long burst? A long burst of quality ammo that shoots really well. But that can be expensive. It is a little bit more costly than, like a standard Rifleman class, but it can be not quite as costly as some of the other classes we're going to talk about. But this is a situational con that goes with the situational pro that I talked about of the higher energy limit. Situational con is minimum engagement distance. Now, a lot of event promoters, especially the ones that allow machine guns full auto when they don't allow rifles full auto, and that will allow machine guns higher velocity limits, that comes with a minimum engagement distance. Even MMG at MilSim West has a 50-foot minimum engagement distance. And you're usually not allowed to clear buildings with machine guns that shoot hot or shoot full auto when rifles aren't allowed to shoot full auto. So your building clearing capacity is more limited. Obviously, situational. If you run an LMG at MilSim West, like standard 249 or an RPK, and you're shooting Rifleman limits, go to town. You can room clear with that, which is hilarious, and I love doing that. But you can do that. Then, if you've got something like at an AMS game, you have a 50-foot minimum engagement distance, and you have to break the plane of a window in order to shoot out of a building. You cannot shoot within buildings. Now, obviously, this can be offset by switching to a secondary weapon, but you are then required to carry a secondary weapon in order to be useful in tight quarters. That is a disadvantage, and that adds to the cost of the class, so something to consider there. But overall, obviously, machine gun is a super useful role. If it's not an indoor-only event, there's some events where it's like, I went to Red Storm East back in 2015, and because it was all indoor, they didn't even allow machine guns. It was just, what's the use? The entire thing is indoor, and they don't allow machine guns indoors, so they just had flat no machine guns, as I recall. So unless it's an event like that, I've never run into a situation where machine guns weren't useful. So despite the drawbacks of the class, I think that is probably one of the most useful classes. Obviously, not quite as versatile as Rifleman, though. Next, we have the favorite class of everyone's favorite member of Gun Gamers. He's the best member of Gun Gamers. I'll fight you if you disagree. Garrett. Garrett loves his grenades. We love him for his grenades. And obviously, we're talking about Grenadier class. Grenadier class offers you something none of the other classes offer you in any capacity, and that is anti-vehicle capability. 99% of events that allow vehicles require explosives to be launched at a vehicle in order to disable the vehicle. That means you need a grenade launcher or rocket launcher of some type. So Grenadier offers you that anti-vehicle capability that you cannot get with any other class, unless they let you, shoot the drivers out or something. But that can be, a lot of people don't want to do with that. They just have people leave the windows up. But the other thing that you get with the Grenadier that you don't get with other classes is really easy building and hardpoint clearing. Let me paint you a picture. You are trying to clear a building, and as you make entry, there is a room of bad guys. This is the corner that they're hiding on. They're all on this side of the corner, and you only have visibility this way. If they stay on this corner and maybe only send one guy to lean out and pop some shots or throw grenades your way every now and then, you cannot clear them out except by some crazy maneuver, throwing grenades back, or, making some slog all the way down that hallway. Grenadier, or, obviously throwing grenades can do this job, but if that distance is more than thrown grenades can reliably handle, Grenadier can roll up, pop a grenade into that room, everyone in that room is dead. There is not a more efficient solution to clearing rooms and clearing hard points than some form of explosive. And Grenadiers allow you to easily and precisely put that explosive exactly where you want it. Obviously, thrown explosives can be very useful too, so that could be something to consider, is that maybe you want the Grenadier to save his grenades for the situation where hand-thrown explosives can't be useful, but let's say that firefight is taking place over 150 feet. Obviously, I would say at that point you might try to close some of the distance, but if that firefight is taking place at 150 feet over open ground, a lot easier for Garrett to come in with his tag launcher and launch a tag into that window than it is for you to try to yeet an EG-67 through that window. So Grenadiers offer very easy hardpoint and bunker and room clearing, just way more efficient and way more easy, and it can clear people from out behind cover. And as I mentioned with the range, grenades can shoot pretty fucking far out of a tag-in launcher, actually. This is something that we've seen. Garrett has gotten some crazy long-range kills with these tag-ins. I mean, there's one that he had on video that, oh my God, I want to say it was close to 200 some meters. I'll put the video clip.
Eyes up, guys. Let's see if he does this. If he does, I owe him money.
Toby. Oh, he's waving at us.
Oh, that went over.
Bye! Bye!
Aw. Damn.
Was it short or too high?
Short. An airburst.
They should still be dead though.
Oh my God, you got them! Woo! You have made my weekend. Thank you. Thank you. I owe you a case.
But it is wild the amount of distance he was able to get and airburst this grenade and kill this group of guys. There are not many weapons in Airsoft that can match that distance and actually manage a kill. And of course, with the fact that, grenade blows up, everyone around grenade is dead, you get group casualty production. And this is something that even a machine gun can have a hard time truly replicating, because when you wipe out a group that's in an area together or all in one room, you can break medic chains, you can prevent people from getting dragged off to get revived, and you can prevent someone who was, you kill one guy in a corner, someone else can come take his place. You kill everyone on that side of the corner, you cleared the corner. So that group casualty production is just an awesome advantage. Of course, all of these advantages come with their fair share of disadvantages, because if grenades being this awesome was accessible, everybody would do it. But there is a high skill requirement to be a good Grenadier, and it can take a lot of practice to really learn your angles, learn your arcs, learn how to aim, and learn how to even maintain the actual tag shells themselves. Those things can be maintenance hogs. They like to crack when you use CO2. They need oil pretty regularly, because if you're using CO2, it's a very dry gas. And Garrett brings a full kit of extra seals and parts with him to every game, and he winds up needing them every game. Now, of course, you can get something like the ML36. I think it's the ML36. Yeah, it's the ML36, and that will make things a little bit easier, because then you're not worrying so much about maintaining so many parts, but it's expensive. expensive to go that route. And grenades in general are expensive. You're talking $5 to $10 a shot easy for a lot of these grenades, at least. And then you're also talking about, the gas and the specialty equipment, the specialty load-bearing equipment to carry them, or even just, the extra shit you have to carry, which adds to weight and bulk. And grenade launchers, you rarely want to carry a grenade launcher as your only weapon system. So either you put this on the front of a rifle, at which point it adds all kinds of heavy front weight to your rifle, or you carry a standalone grenade launcher system, which means you need to have it on some kind of holster that then is adding all kinds of swinging all over the place, or you have it on a sling and that's another snag point, then you have to get it out. There's no way around it. It can be a pain to carry grenades, and it can especially be a pain to carry enough grenades to really make the Grenadier role useful. And it can be very, very expensive to acquire the equipment, to acquire all the specialized tools, to acquire the actual pyro itself, and to practice enough to get good with it. And the last disadvantage is the tag-in variable, is what I'm going to call it. Not every event allows tag-in grenades or the useful tag-in grenades. If the event you're going to doesn't allow any form of tag-in grenade, like not even the chalk, you might as well leave that grenade launcher at home, in my opinion. I have yet to see a grenade launcher be used really effectively with foam rockets or shower shells, at least as compared to what they are capable with tag-in shells and tag-in projectiles. The tag-in variable is such a huge, huge thing. If the tag-ins are allowed, grenade launcher is super powerful. If tag-ins are not allowed, leave the damn thing at home, in my opinion. You're better off grabbing another machine gun or just ditching the weight and carrying a rifle. And hopefully there's no vehicles there, because if there are vehicles there, then I guess you got to try to make foam rockets work somehow. And oh God, anyone else remember when that was the standard? God, that wasn't fun. All right. Next, we have a class that is not at every MilSim game. And I'm immediately starting out with a disadvantage of this class, but trust me, we'll get into the advantages, and they are actually pretty numerous if the class is allowed. But not every MilSim game has the submachine gunner class. The class can be very fun when it is allowed and when the AO calls for it. But as far as I know, Third Coast Airsoft, I think Lion Claws is a version of this rule set now, Desert Fox events, and if I recall, American MilSim has a version of this rule now. I'm probably forgetting some, or I might have got some wrong. If you know, actually no, Halcyon Tactical had a version of this rule too when I went to their game earlier this year. But not every event promoter calls for this rule. Obviously, MilSim West doesn't have a version of this rule because Rifleman can do full auto with no MED anyway, so who cares? I don't think Sato has a version of this rule either. But the SMG class in general, at a lot of games, the event promoter will allow you to use full auto with no minimum engagement distance if your gun is a 9mm or equivalent pistol caliber submachine gun type weapon that shoots less than 1 joule of velocity. And that can be pretty neat when you've got riflemen who are limited to semi-automatic and who can thus have a little bit of a disadvantage clearing rooms compared to somebody with a submachine gun who can just spray a corner and clear everybody in a room. Also, at Desert Fox events and Halcyon, not sure about every version of this rule set. I haven't played this rule set at a lot of events. But at those events, submachine gunners are also allowed to use drum magazines. Because obviously you've got like the PPSH was made with a drum magazine. You've got other submachine guns that have had drum magazines made. But they will allow drum mags to be used with submachine guns. And that can be pretty cool because then you've basically got an indoors LMG. So the submachine gun can have a lot of ammo on tap, can have full auto capability, and be a mass casualty producing weapon indoors. And that can actually be pretty neat. So this can be really useful when breaching buildings or clearing out structures and frankly just buzzsaw a corner while you're trying to clear it. I know it sounds like a speed softy tactic, but like the fact of the matter is that's what the class is built for. You're going to be clearing corners and, breaching through doors and just spraying down rooms as fast as you can and hopefully taking them out before they take you out. Especially if you throw a grenade in beforehand, easy. Now, one of the biggest advantages of this kit, obviously in addition to, the different firepower capability, is the fact that it's very light. Submachine guns tend to be short, light, personal defense weapon type of weapons. They are built to clear rooms in real life. So what do you want for a room clearing weapon? You want a short, light, handy gun that can easily round corners. And guess what? That's what you get in Airsoft. Crazy, right? So obviously, there's a little weight, there's a little bulk, and even the magazines tend to be a little bit smaller and slimmer and a little easier to carry than you would get with, an M4 magazine or something. Sometimes it can be a little bit lower capacity too, but that depends on the submachine gun, and especially if you're at an event that allows you to use a fucking drum magazine. I don't want to hear you whining about the fact that your normal mid-caps are only 100 rounds. Of course, the drum magazine is a situational advantage. Not every event promoter allows that as far as I know, but if they do allow it, holy shit, you basically win the indoors. And the other nice thing about this is, again, depending on what you're going with and what type of build you're doing, submachine guns can be had pretty cheap. I mean, you can get MP5s for $150. Even a nice VFC Avalon MP5 is $300 or 300 some odd dollars. I totally forget. I haven't looked in a while. Might even be cheaper than that for all I know. But you're not paying more than a standard rifle cost for a submachine gun. And if you're building it to 1 joule with full auto, it's not a high stress build in general, unless you're really going crazy and doing 40, 50 rounds a second or some shit like that. At that point, just go HPA and have yourself a little mini A10 Warthog. But it's not an expensive kit. You do have to buy a little bit of different load-bearing equipment. That can be a little bit of a pain, but as compared to building a Rifleman kit, it's really not any more expensive or hard to put together, honestly. Now, the biggest disadvantages of the SMG kit are tied to its advantages somewhat, or at least tied to why it has advantages. Obviously, one of the biggest disadvantages, not every event calls for this. So MilSim West doesn't have an SMG kit rule or an SMG class. I don't think Emsato has an SMG class, and I'm really trying to remember if I got it right that Lion Claws or AMS allow this. They may or may not. I might have totally gotten that wrong. But definitely check the tax op and the rule set of whatever event you're going to make sure they have the SMG class, because if they don't, you're going to show up with your drum magazine and be like, you can't use that. We don't have that rule here. And that ties into the high degree of situational sensitivity of the SMG class in general. Obviously, if you are not in a tight area of operations and if you're not doing a lot of building clearing, then SMGs aren't really that useful. You're better off having the extra range of a rifleman because SMGs suffer so much at long range compared to other classes. I know that you can get a lot of effective range out of a gun shooting 1 joule or less, but it is so much easier to dodge BBs that are going lower than 1 joule, and those BBs do not quite have the oomph to get out to longer ranges, and it can be a pain to hop things like 3.2s and 3.6s at 1 joule. So you really do have a very limited effectiveness at range as compared to guys running 1.5 joules with a rifle or 1.8 joules with an LMG. So you're very limited in your capability. It's really only useful if there's tight fields of fire and if there's tight quarters that you can fight in. Otherwise, if you're doing a lot of field fighting, leave the SMG at home, take a rifle. Next, we have squad designated marksman. Now, this is actually a role I have never personally played. So take my opinion on it with a grain of salt, but I did consult with the members of the Gun Gamers team who have played it, and they generally agreed with my list of pros and cons and actually helped me refine it. So don't worry, I'm not totally talking out of my ass, just mostly. Obviously, one of the big advantages of the squad designated marksman, where it gets its name, is that it is a range advantaged class. You have a higher velocity limit. Some events will actually allow you to go up to the same velocity limit as the actual proper sniper rifles. MilSim West, I'm looking at you. So you can have 2.86 joules cranking off a semi-automatic rifle. Granted, you have the 100-foot minimum engagement distance, which we'll get into when we talk about disadvantages, but that's a pretty significant amount of energy advantage you're allowed to have over a standard rifle. And even at the events that, are more like 1.86 or 2.1 joules or something like that, that can still make a big difference if you're feeding really high quality ammo into your designated marksman rifle, as you should be. Because then you could be launching, 0.4 gram BBs 300 plus feet, and that can be really hard to match for a standard rifleman. Of course, with that amount of range and accuracy comes the need for a scope. Most people who run a designated marksman rifle are going to put a scope on it so they can track their BBs, make adjustments for follow-up shots, and see where their BBs are going at long range and see their targets at long range. Long range for airsoft. Obviously, most people in real firearm settings at 300 feet and less would be running a red dot, but in airsoft, shot tracking, yada, yada, yada. But as a result, that can mean that you have a spotting advantage with your designated marksman rifle because you have a built-in source of magnification, especially if you have a good scope with good light gathering and good clarity. That can be very useful when you're doing, reconnaissance patrols or area security. Or if you're like my buddy Jim, who's an absolute fucking mad lad, and you have a thermal scope on your designated marksman rifle, game over. No one can hide from you except behind hard cover and not move. So with those two advantages, you basically have a built-in squad sniper. You don't have to rely on, a platoon sniper or someone going off and doing their own thing with a ghillie suit and a spotter and sitting somewhere for 4 hours. You can just keep this guy on tap with your squad, going out on patrols, have him spot areas ahead of you, have him hold security on sensitive areas, and you can use him to pick off and spot long-range targets. Now, a situational advantage that I actually want to point out, based on my experience of playing with the aforementioned Jim on a squad designated marksman role while I was being a machine gunner, I have something I call the Wombo combo, which is designated marksman and squad machine gunner. You put those two things together with a good synergy and good communication, and it is a absolute metagame play. It is the BXR of airsoft. It is the plasma pistol to battle rifle of airsoft. It is disgusting. What you get is you get a marksman in one position spotting targets and pinning them down from one angle and calling them out to the machine gunner, who is then able to spot targets and pin them down or kill them from the other angle. And what you get is two people with more range than the rifleman they're fighting, communicating back and forth with greater firepower capacity than the rifleman they're fighting, and there's basically no angle that they can be safe from, and it's really easy to use that combination to allow your friendlies to push through or run flanks or just fucking wipe them out. It is really, really easy to synchronize a designated marksman and a machine gunner. I would almost say that with the right combination of people, it's more powerful than two machine guns. It is disgusting, at least based on my observation. Maybe someone else has a story like that in the comments, but it's tasty. Wonderful combination. It's got the right texture. The flavors play well together. It's amazing. Of course, mentioning machine gunners, we get into the disadvantage of designated marksman rifles. Now, not every event limits all riflemen to semi-auto. MilSim West obviously doesn't limit riflemen to semi-auto, but squad designated marksman rifles at every MilSim event that I have ever seen, always limited to semi-automatic fire only, have to be electronically and or physically locked out of being able to shoot in fully automatic. So obviously, if you have like a mechanical HPA unit, that can be very easily accomplished, or you can just Dremel out that little bit of your selector plate on an AEG, or you can do some programming and shit like that. But some events actually even require designated marksman rifles to have a delay MOSFET, which is a little bit more uncommon these days. That was way more common, back when they were relatively new and people were actually pushing velocities for the first time. But now it's generally just semi-auto. But that does limit your actual suppressive fire capability. As a situational con, that can also limit your ranged suppressive fire capability And it can limit your utility entirely if you're at an event where machine guns are allowed to have a higher velocity, sometimes not that far behind the marksman rifles. So when you've got an MMG shooting 2.1 joules versus your marksman rifle, unless that thing is really, really tuned to the 2.86 joule maximum allowed at MilSim West, not every event promoter, but at MilSim West, unless you've got that marksman rifle really tuned to really take advantage, that MMG shooting 2.1 joules does not have a big range disadvantage compared to you. And it's got a lot more ammo, and it's got a lot more firepower capability, especially because at MilSim West, both of you are limited to 0.32 gram BBs as the heaviest BB option available. So your range advantage is way down comparatively. And then obviously, at other, MilSim event promotions where the DMR is allowed like 1.8 joules or 2.1 joules, if the machine gun is allowed 1.8 joules, again, you've got a pretty narrow gap of range advantage between machine guns. And honestly, at a lot of events, you have a pretty narrow gap of range advantage even over regular riflemen. Because if you've got, say, 30 feet of extra effective range compared to a normal AEG, that 30 feet can be covered so quickly. I mean, most people can sprint 10 yards in a second, I would hope. But if you can sprint 10 yards in a second or even 2 seconds, that realistically is often the amount of advantage that a lot of DMRs have over a really well-tuned standard rifle or over a machine gun. So DMRs have a pretty narrow window of advantage, all things considered. So granted, their BBs will reach people faster, so you do have that advantage of engagements at range, but you are still vulnerable to all incoming fire and need to play really, really carefully if that's the case. And then, of course, we get into the last disadvantage of DMRs is cost and barrier to entry. Now, the barrier to entry of DMRs has gotten lower in the era of HPA because it's really easy to buy an HPA unit, drop in R-Hop kit, mash the pieces together, and bam, you've got something that can hop heavy BBs at really long range and make a half-decent DMR. But that still is a relatively high amount of cost as compared to grabbing a stock VFC or Crytac and going to the field and being ready to play. So it does take a little bit of specialty building, a little bit of extra cost, a little bit of time investment if you're going to do the actual work yourself, or a time investment of sending your gun out or ordering the parts in to have someone else do it. Now, I also think that the DMR class suffers a little bit by comparison to a kit that Corey and I talk about a lot, like a recce rifle, where you tune to the limit of the Rifleman energy limits and then build it to hop really heavy BBs. I think that in general, for most people, that's going to be a little bit of an easier and maybe more versatile version of a DMR. But a true DMR has all the advantages and disadvantages listed, whereas an accurized recce rifle, you're basically a rifleman, and as I've said, rifleman is basically the best class. And finally, we get into the sniper class, who uses a sniper rifle, which is typically a bolt-action rifle or a semi-automatic locked rifle, often with a delay MOSFET. Sniper rifles are still where you see delay MOSFETs required for a lot of the semi-auto versions. But in general, most people are building sniper rifles with bolts at this point, because bolt-action sniper rifles have gotten so much more accessible over the last couple of years, turns out. But the sniper is your long-range specialist. In general, nobody is going to outclass the sniper at the longest ranges. At most events, the sniper has the highest energy limit allowed by any class. I think only MilSim West is the event that I know of that really allows DMRs to be pretty on par with sniper rifles. Generally speaking, though, sniper rifles have the highest level of advantage for actual limits and energy. So no one can quite shoot BBs as hard, as fast, and as far as a sniper rifle. The other nice thing about sniper rifles is that they tend to be pretty lightweight as far as kit goes. Obviously, you can load yourself up with a ghillie suit if you hate yourself. I think those are of relatively limited usefulness at most airsoft games based on what I've seen. Granted, I've not played the sniper class, so if you disagree with me, let me know. But I generally think that mobility is actually a greater advantage in a sniper kit. And as a result, I think things like Viper hoods and half ghillies are way more useful. And those are still a lighter kit than most of the chest rig, plate carrier, and all those types of crazy builds that you see people doing for rifles, MGs, and DMRs even. So pretty lightweight kit, pretty easy to stay mobile. And that's kind of the point. Of course, as mentioned with the designated marksman class, this is your spotting and range specialist. This guy should have a good radio, should be on overwatch on sensitive areas, holding security or watching where a squad is about to move to advance, and be on platoon net, talking to the platoon, talking and giving people pertinent information and helping to coordinate the assault. I actually think sniper is a very misunderstood class at MilSim games, where a lot of people go into it expecting to, get all kinds of crazy action and crazy kill streaks and whatnot, because that's what they see on YouTube. But most of those YouTube sniper compilations are not at more organized MilSim games. Those are usually at open plays or at events that aren't super limiting with sniper rifles, and that aren't that coordinated in terms of platoon and company level movements. If you actually go to events that have platoon and company level movements, the sniper is usually going to be the guy who's sitting in one place, looking at where the platoon or company is going to be moving, and radioing in what the strength of the enemy is, what their equipment is, what their setup is like, high value targets. So of course, everything that I just mentioned can be both an advantage and a disadvantage of the class. The advantage, of course, is that that is a very useful role that someone can play if they're good at it and they're into it. The disadvantage can be that a lot of people don't realize that at the MilSim level, that's how that role is typically supposed to be played. So they don't go into it expecting that, and then they have a bad time and they're not into it. But of course, that can all be sensitive depending on what you're into and what you want to play. Of course, this means that playing the sniper role well in a MilSim setting, again, take everything I say with the appropriate grain of salt, remember the situations I'm talking about, but playing that particular role well in a MilSim setting can be difficult, and it can be difficult to get into. A lot of MilSim games will have very limited platoon level sniper positions or even company level sniper positions, and they will generally fill those based kind of on who is going to be good at it rather than who's the newcomer who wants to try their hand at it, and they might kick you out of that role if you're not very good at it, or they might just leave you in the middle of nowhere all weekend reporting on the movements of deer. So keep that in mind. It is a little bit difficult to master and a little bit difficult to get into. It can be very rewarding if you really want to play it the way it's meant to be played at the MilSim level. As a result, I would say squad marksman is generally a much easier way to play what a lot of people really want out of like the sniper experience, where you get to kind of do the spotting and long range targets and crazy long range kills on a squad level, moving more with your squad and playing more with your friends, as opposed to going on mile-long recon patrols in order to sit in one spot and take Overwatch for an hour or two. And as a result of the ammunition needs of a sniper rifle, generally speaking, you want very high quality, very heavy, very expensive ammunition. And as a result of the low capacity of sniper rifles in general and the low overall event capacity rules for most sniper rifles, your casualty production is pretty limited, especially with the rate of fire of a bolt-action rifle. So you are going to be a limited casualty producing type of role. Now again, maybe you're into that. Maybe you'd rather get that one super sweet kill, that one super sweet shot. Awesome, that can be an advantage. But if you're not into having super limited firepower and getting pinned down by machine guns all game, then yeah, maybe you want to try something else. And I'm considering how to say this diplomatically, but I realize that when I say it the way I want to say it, most of you are going to agree with me. Most people who really, really want to play the sniper role are not very good at the sniper role. And I don't say that to disrespect those of you watching who are good at the sniper role. Understand, I'm not insulting you, I'm paying you respect. if you are actually good at the sniper role, you are the minority. So many people go into the sniper role at larger MilSim events and more organized games and think, I'm gonna get those crazy kill streaks that I see on YouTube, not realizing that A, most of the situations they're gonna find themselves in don't call for or enable that at all, and B, most of those videos are not reflective of their level of experience, their level of skill, or the type of game that they're at. Even, Swamp Sniper, Snovrich, all those guys, even when they get those crazy kill streaks at games like MilSim West and whatnot, understand that that is the 1% of the 1% of situations that snipers will ever find themselves in, and they are the 1% of airsoft snipers who have so many years and hundreds or thousands of hours of practice, all culminating in that highlight reel. You will not consistently have that experience, and that's okay as long as you understand that, and that makes that experience all the more special when you do have it. All right, I think I've been rambling long enough. My beer is pretty much empty, this Dogfish Head Super 8, if any of you were curious. Those are my thoughts on the pros and cons of the various common weapons classes that you see at airsoft games. Obviously, I still maintain that Rifleman is generally the superior, versatile, flexible, easy to learn, hard to master, useful everywhere type of class. My personal favorite, other than Rifleman, my actual favorite to play is the Machine Gunner. And I know a lot of people's favorite is the Sniper. I know a lot of other people's favorite is the Grenadier. Some people really like the SMG role. I think the SMG role is really cool when it's called for. You let me know in the comments what your favorite role to play is and what situations you think it's super useful in that maybe I missed. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below, and understand that all the pros and cons that I've laid out here, I'm not trying to shit on or disrespect anybody. I'm simply trying to provide a little bit of a guide and a little bit of my opinion on what some of these things are useful for in what types of events, specifically MilSim events and organized events that I talked about today. If you disagree with me, agree with me, yada, 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 like I've said, comment section is right there. And I'm gonna stop talking, finish my beer, and get this video uploaded so I can actually say I uploaded something, because, man, it has been hard to actually stay regular with this channel, given that most of what I've been doing this year is chairsofting, thanks to COVID-19. So hopefully I'll be able to get out onto the field more regularly in the near future, maybe early next year, and hope that New York State's travel restrictions ease up a little bit. If you don't know, I basically cannot leave my state. So all that aside, thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. And I've been Eric from Gun Gamers. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.
Thank you for watching this video from Gun Gamers. We hope you enjoyed watching it as much as we enjoyed making it. Check the description below if you'd like to buy a t-shirt or a patch, and use the coupon code JUDY10 for 10% off of your next order at Amped Airsoft. Thank you again for watching, and praise Judy.